Okay, thank you, Belinda, and good morning, everybody. It's really an honor to be able to do this with all of you. And the first thing I'd like to do is introduce the panelists. I'm delighted to be joined by Toby Ponroy. Toby is a jeweler and a jewelry designer. He is also a board member of the Alliance for Responsible Mining, as well as ethical metalsmiths, and really an inspiring human being. Sitting next to him is Patricia Seabrid. She is the executive director of the World Diamond Council, and she also has a firm called Hoya Consulting, and she brings a wealth of expertise with her. To my immediate right is Sarah Yude, Senior Counsel, of the Jewelers Vigilance Committee, and a fantastic organization. She's also a board member of the Women's Jewelry Association. And to her right is Marla Hedworth, who is the Global Business Lead for the jewelry and watch industry at UL Verification Services, which is involved with assisting people through and entities through the certification process. And just on your chairs, there were two pieces of paper. Hopefully, if you are in the back, we may have run out of the gray one. These two pieces of paper are about the Gold Conference, which is something I founded. It is a very ecumenical gathering of everybody who is interested in gold jewelry, be they great designers, experts in marketing, sustainability proponents, and it is an incredible two-day forum, and we hope you'll join us. And then underneath the gray sheet is a poster that talks a little bit about how sustainability both relates to the conference but also relates to that which is important to you and to us every single day, and that is how to sell and move people to buy beautiful jewelry. So when we were thinking about this panel, there are two ways that we can do it. One is we certainly have questions prepared that I can ask the panelists, and they'll respond and you'll get a great deal of information. The other way is that we can respond to your questions. We can do this either way. We can start in manner one, and if there's stuff that suddenly comes up and you want to take over with your questions, we welcome that. I want this to be a fluid exchange between us all, so whatever is most comfortable for all of you is what we all would like to do. And in thinking about taking on this rather daunting range of topics, it seemed to me that one of the things that we ought to talk about is, what do some of these words mean? And so we decided that the first thing that would be a good definition to discuss is, what does ethically sourced mean? And so I'm going to turn first to Toby Ponroy and then to Pat, and they're going to speak to the meaning of ethically sourced, which is effectively telling you, in a sense, why bother. And at the end, I'll make a few remarks about how these topics relate to the previous talks that you've heard, because this is not just something hanging out there. It is part of the core. Toby.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and really thanks everybody for attending this morning and to be here to discover something that will make a difference in your lives and in your businesses. About 13, 14 years ago, I woke up to how, as a jewelry designer, custom jeweler, and wholesale manufacturer, I woke up to how nasty the business is that we've been in. That mining is the most toxic practice on the planet. There is no more negatively impactful practice that's done on the face of the earth than metals mining. And when I saw that, I said, I can't do this. I cannot make jewelry. I cannot continue to do this knowing that I'm ignoring this. And so I had the inspiration to approach the largest refiner that we were working with at the time, Hoover and Strong, and said, would you please keep separate your scrap gold and purify that. So then realloy it, sell it to us as eco gold, we can then sell that. So I think the thing for me was, it's got to make a difference. It's got to contribute to the quality of life on the planet. And from there, it's really taken off into something that is, there's so much interest in. But sustainably sourced is both a personal passion, but it's also now, it's grown into this, what is it that we need in the jewelry business more than anything else? A story. We do. We need a fabulous story. That it's always been about the story. And I say we don't have a better story than sustainably, ethically sourced. It's the best thing going. And when you and I get passionate about something, that's when the customers relate to us. When we're really passionate about something being possible, that awakens people. That they start to vibrate with that. Our staffs as well. To have something that they're up to that's bigger than themselves, bigger than just making the money out of it. That's what I would say is the massive benefit of responsible or sustainable sourcing is to the jewelry industry and to each of our companies. It's gold mine, literally, to allow ourselves to get inspired by the passionate aspect of what's possible on the planet. So that's basically how I'd like to lead off today, where I'm standing with regard to all of this. Thank you.
So Toby and I talked before we started, and we decided he's going to share his passion with what ethically sourced means, and I would try to share with you the cold hard facts, the dry, difficult part. And I think for the entire industry, and actually for the world, the challenge comes and the confusion comes around ethically sourced because it means different things to different people. The consumers have an idea of what responsible sourcing or ethically sourced means. NGOs have a different idea. It can mean to some it addresses human rights abuses on the ground, gender and child labor discrimination. To others it means environmental degradation. And to others, environmentally or responsibly sourced simply means knowing your supply chain, knowing your vendor, know your customer, KYC. And I'm very appreciative to be invited to participate today because I wanted to bring that perspective of the Kimberley process and what we've done, what the industry has done relative to diamonds, because it gives that point of perspective, because it is one of the first chain of custody certification schemes that the industry is familiar with. And you know, it was created at the initiative of NGOs bringing attention to conflict, war-torn countries in Africa who were diamond-producing nations where the conflict was funded by the illicit sale of rough diamonds. And it was mandated by the UN for the NGOs, industry, and governments to sit down together and come up with a solution. And so for what it was set up to achieve, it's actually been very successful. But what has happened is that definition of responsibly sourced, ethically sourced, means different things to different people. So the NGOs are saying, okay, Kimberley process doesn't go far enough. It's not addressing human rights issues. It's not addressing the gender discrimination. And so there's talk now, there's all this controversy around trying to change that definition of conflict diamonds. So there's always, the confusion and difficulty comes because ethically sourced means different things to different people. And as an industry, we have to kind of get our heads around, okay, how do we deal with that? And that is being driven by laws and regulations that are being required, not only by the United States through the Dodd-Frank Conflict Minerals Act of 2010, but also through regulations in other countries. The EU also has a Conflict Minerals Act. And they are driving the responsibility, the necessity of publicly traded companies, including publicly traded jewelry companies, to have a framework in place to be able to prove that they are compliant with these laws and regulations. And so that just pulls the entire rest of the jewelry chain and retailers who are not publicly traded into this whole responsible sourcing initiative, but it's driven by Dodd-Frank and other countries' regulations.
Okay, so I'm going to turn to Sarah. You now, please.
So this morning, I'm going to take off my lawyer hat briefly and put on my millennial hat. For you on this panel, I am barely a millennial, but qualified enough to just remind you that the millennials who are shopping at your stores want that story. They want that information, and they're going to take that story and then tell all of their friends the story. And I think my perspective has changed in this industry. I've been with the JVC for over 5 years now, and when I first started working at JVC and I would go to trade shows and shop for jewelry, I didn't really care about where it came from. I was just like, oh my God, everything is so inexpensive, this is so cool. And now, having learned a lot about the responsible sourcing initiatives going on in the industry and participating in some of the industry events, my perspective has really changed. And I actually wore example jewelry today. This necklace that I'm wearing, I bought my first visit to the AGTA Gem Fair in Tucson, and I didn't know anything about anything. I didn't even know how to say chalcedony. I said it wrong for like 2 years, and I just bought it from a guy who was there, and I didn't know anything about it. And then these earrings that I'm wearing are I purchased just in December, and they are also chalcedony, but they are from a designer who has made ethical sourcing an important part of her business practice. And not only did I know where these earrings were made, but I know where all the different parts came from. And I got the story from her, and now I'm telling my friends, okay, so you want a piece of jewelry, you gotta go buy from this person, because these are all the things that she's doing, and she's participating in these industry-wide initiatives. So that information is something that is going to be essential for you in terms of marketing your products to the millennials who we're all nervous aren't going to buy things. I promise you we are. I could tell you a story about my dumb phone, or I can tell you a story about the jewelry I'm wearing. I'm much more interested in talking to you about the jewelry that I'm wearing.
Very eloquent, and I just wanted to point out that not only does this relate to the millennials issue, but it also relates to the baby boomer issue and the notion of authenticity and transparency, because I'm a baby boomer, and I can tell you that for me, the notion of authenticity, the notion of transparency, the idea of the story, and the story is something that unites us all. And one of the things that people perhaps don't realize is storytelling is innate in humanity. We crave it, and so it marries well with the craving or the desire for jewelry. So, for whatever that's worth, those are a few comments about how this actually relates to the core of what we're trying to do here, which is make beautiful jewelry available, desired, and acquired by the customer. The next topic that seemed to be very relevant to this conversation was how do we actually trace gold from mine to the consumer? What does chain of custody mean? And how does this relate to certification? So again, and also what does the certification mean to my business? And Pat touched on that a bit briefly, but I'm going to turn to her first and then to Marla to discuss these issues. And then anybody else who wants to chime in, please do so.
Thank you, Lisa. So chain of custody, and all of these words are relatively new to the jewelry industry, and you're just going to keep hearing them more and more. But the actual definition is that the chain of custody means the historical chronology of ownership. So that actual chronological documentation or paper or electronic trail that shows the custody and control and transfer of physical or electronic evidence. And the Kimberly process certification scheme is one of the very first chain of custody tools for the diamond industry supply chain that tracks rough diamonds from mine to manufacture. Again, this chain of custody, it goes back to being driven by the publicly traded companies. And they are, because it's now required, and they have a requirement to be able to prove to the government that they can have a verifiable chain of custody, they are looking at ways of how to do that. So organizations like the Responsible Jewelry Council were actually created to be that framework that chain of custody compliance could be proven. And the Responsible Jewelry Council, as well as many other organizations, use something called the OECD Due Diligence Guidelines. This stands for the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. And you will be hearing a lot more about OECD due diligence and guidelines throughout the industry. It was actually, the OEDC due diligence has been adopted by 43 OECD and non-OECD countries. So it's also, the OECD is set up like the UN. Countries are the actual members. And they have created this standard for companies to use to meet their due diligence compliance requirements. So these are recommendations that are embraced by the organizations like the RJC, like ARM, to give the industries that need to do this to show their compliance with conflict mineral traceability. It gives them that ability to track all of these items. I wanted everyone in the room to know that Joe is going to be emailing out not only the link to the due diligence for conflict minerals, there's a link to the due diligence for the gold supply chain, as well as a document which is called the Gold Industry and Sector Initiatives for Responsible Sourcing, which actually outlines all of the responsible sourcing framework initiatives and what they do. And that is coming to all of you, so you kind of get an overview of all of these different initiatives and have a better idea of how to use them, where you need to use them. But you will be hearing more about the due diligence guidelines as the industry moves forward through all of this.
So I'm going to turn to Marla from UL, who brings a wealth of experience in helping to make compliance possible, if you will.
Hi, good morning, everyone. So some of the perspective that I can bring in UL as an organization is we are actually the auditing firms that go in, and we work very closely with the Responsible Jewelry Council, and we're in factories, in facilities all over the world actually conducting the audits. So as Pat talks about, specifically she mentioned the Responsible Jewelry Council. The Responsible Jewelry Council is really one of the only organizations that can provide certification for your supply chain, all the way from mine, every step on the supply chain through to the end retail store. And talking about chain of custody is really about knowing your supply chain and knowing every step of your supply chain. So one of the ways, I think people, when they hear auditing, or they hear, you know, there's going to be an organization coming into my store or coming to my organization and they're going to be going through all this, they immediately get very scared and they think, what is this going to mean? It's not a financial audit, so that's one thing to be, that probably will take away a lot of the concerns. And it's really, again, it's just about documentation. So for example, the RJC has really two certifications. There's a code of practice, and that is essentially going in and looking at all of the management systems in your organization. And that can be anything that's applicable to any supply or any organization across the supply chain. So this can be for a mine, this can be for a retail store, this could be for a diamond buyer. The chain of custody is an additional certification where you would be actually mapping out and being able to make provenance claims of a product that you wanted to bring to market. So for example, if you had said that you wanted to say that this gold is from this specific mine, the RJC provides the framework to map out that chain of custody through transfer documents throughout the supply chain. Some of the things that we find actually going into an auditing is actually, it's just, I was sitting with some ladies this morning at breakfast and they were so surprised. It was just the things that they didn't think about documenting. So it could be something like a fire drill in your facility. Just having kind of that outlined and all of your management systems in place. The RJC has a fabulous training documentations on their website. It's open to anybody. You can go on, there's webinars, you can download their toolkits, their self-assessment booklets, And that's a really easy starting point to kind of give yourself an idea of what are the things I should be thinking about? What are the questions I should be asking my suppliers? One of the ways that it's, for retailers, when you're all the way at the end of your supply chain, it's very difficult for you to map everything backwards. So the idea of embracing something like the RJC, and I keep saying the RJC because it is one of the only global industry frameworks, with the exception of Signet and De Beers best practices, it is really the only one that hits the whole supply chain, is when everybody adopts one standard, you can put that kind of responsibility back on your supply chain. So, just starting with asking those questions, I think, is a very easy starting point.
Toby?
Yeah, thank you. So also, in addition to the RJC, is the Alliance for Responsible Mining, which was born about 13 years ago, established by jewelry activists and local people in Colombia who saw that there was a real need for, on both sides of it, from artisanal and small-scale miners, all the way out to the jewelry industry and the final customer that owned the piece, to have traceability, where in that process the miners, the communities that have said, we want to mine responsibly, we want to do it right, we want to do it without chemicals, and they formulated a standard over several years, built a standard that miners could adhere to, miners could accomplish that standard and be certified. And usually it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years for a mining community to become certified. It costs them a lot of money, time, energy. They've just seen in their hearts that this is the way that we want to go. So, and that's what attracted me to ARM, the Alliance for Responsible Mining. Fairmind, that standard, is that we are actually empowering people who we know on the ground, people whose lives depend on doing it right, and that it's inspiring. Actually, the whole jewelry industry is being inspired by this leadership, and the mining industry is waking up. These miners get paid a premium. When they are mining according to the standard, we're paying them roughly 10 to 15% more than they would otherwise get as basically a reward to plow back into their community and enhance the quality of life there. And so we're making a difference on the ground, and it's a completely inspiring story that we can say that we know where this gold came from, a mining community in Colombia in the Andes, that gold also has been put in the Olympic medals, and most recently the Nobel Peace Prizes. The President of Colombia won the Nobel Peace Prize, and the gold that went into those medals came actually from the mines, 2 mines in Colombia. So amazing stories, amazing development, and just really something to watch. Thank you.
Sarah, do you have from the lawyer perspective,
Yes, just briefly from the lawyer perspective, I wanted to note that there's been a lot of talk recently from the current president and the current administration about eliminating the Dodd-Frank conflict minerals provisions and other aspects of the Dodd-Frank Act. And although that is certainly quite possible, I think the industry, the jewelry industry, and the various government entities that regulate it feel pretty strongly that those provisions should continue. And from people that I've talked to in the industry, they all think that even if that does get eliminated, the industry has gone so much further than Dodd-Frank at this point that there's no turning back. We're not going backwards. I think the industry is going to continue requiring these certification schemes and knowing your customer, knowing your vendors, asking where things are from, and having that information, because again, our customers are requiring this.
I'm just going to chime in from the baby boomer, mother of a millennial perspective, and that is that I think the social zeitgeist, we have embraced this notion of transparency, of knowing the origin of the story of where things come from. I know that this moves the heart of my daughter and the people that she knows. I see the resonance that this has in so many of the advertising campaigns that have embraced this notion of being able to trace the story of your stone, of your mineral, of your gold, etc. And when you give that gift to your beloved, I'm wearing a ring that has Fairmind gold in it. And I think that for our generation as well, this idea of transparency and authenticity has enormous power. It is one of the things that has fueled the Gold Conference from the beginning, and I think that for all of you, one of the things I would say as somebody who looks at the culture is that this is here to stay. And we should embrace it for the positive things that it can do for all of us, for us personally, for our businesses, for our customers. The next definition that we're going to try to tackle here is fair mind. And, oops, started that, fair trade, because they actually have specific meanings, and then there's what they represent that's more of a generalized concept. So I think, Toby, you're going to speak to that.
And I already began a bit to speak about fair mind, that certification, but fundamentally it is a set of standards where in order for a mine to meet that, or a mining community, they must have land reclamation in the process of mining. No chemicals that are dispelled downstream or that released into the environment, or at least minimal standards of chemicals that can be released in that process. Child labor, no child labor, women's rights, working toward fair working conditions for everyone so they can have the possibility of retirement and Social Security and insurance, that kind of thing. So it's a standard that's basically just a human standard that we all would like to have. And fair mind is as a definition, it is a standard that was developed by the Alliance for Responsible Mining. At the time that Fairmind was developing that, ARM was developing the Fair Mine standard, we also were in partnership with the Fair Trade Organization. So Fair Trade is using basically the same standard that ARM developed. Now, we split apart maybe 8 years ago or so and have gone our separate paths. So fair mind and fair trade are just distinct. They're not the same, although the standards are very similar. But they're both standards of quality assurance, of traceability, and of basically that mining is done responsibly from all the way down in each of those mining communities.
Marla?
Could I just actually ask
Sure,
a question?
please.
Well, just going back to the last one, you had said about paying roughly 15% more for responsibly sourced as well. How does that affect though? Because normally when you're buying from a mine, like one of my friends, he owns a mine in the Northwest, and so he gets paid based upon spot value roughly, give or take a little bit of assay. How are you paying on that, and then is that affecting the spot value that the consumers buying at?
Yes, it does. So it's a great question. Thank you for that. It's really this fair mine standard. It only applies to artisanal and small-scale miners. So it does not apply to large-scale mines.
Okay.
Usually, as many as maybe 30 or 40 people in a small-scale operation. The premium at one point had been 10% above spot. No, sorry, 95% of spot. Plus 10% was the fair mine premium that was paid to them. And if it was ecological, that is to say they had no chemicals at all, no mercury, cyanide, or anything like that. I'm sorry, am I just holding this too close maybe? That we would pay 15% over that 95% of spot. And now it's softer, I think it's $4,000 a kilo for Fairmine certified, and $6,000 a kilo for Fairmine ecological gold that has been mined without any chemicals at all. Completely free of that.
Okay.
Did that address that?
Yeah.
And it does get passed along. I mean, one needs to pass that along, and many people are saying they don't want to add that, to make a markup on that, but basically to pay that. But don't mark that up for the customer necessarily. And then some people are also marking it up. But in our company, when we're making a wedding ring that we have paid 15% over 95% of spot, 10% over spot, that we are marking that up, but it might increase the price of the gold in a ring by $90, say. And the customer, when they hear the story, it's absolutely, are you kidding me? This is something that I know I'm making a difference on the planet. This is the first time in history that we've ever been able to supply traceable, to the mine, responsibly sourced gold. Is that a story that most anybody getting married would like to know and be able to share with their friends and family? Absolutely. So it's, the cost has been minimal, really.
Okay.
Thank you.
Actually, let me see, because I wanted to throw something in here, but before that, Marla, I think you wanted to clarify that here.
Sure, so I guess one thing that I can add on that is some of the questions that we get as a third-party auditing firm is really it's just people are unsure of all these terminologies that are out there, if it's fair mine, if it's fair trade. As Lisa was saying, what does ethically sourced mean? And it's extremely important that your staff who are on the sales floor that are educated in this and they know the terminology. To give you an idea for the RJC, for their code of practices, there is a surveillance follow-up where an auditor will actually go into the store and call it a mock sale. So if you are making a claim on something that it is fair mined gold or that it is ethically sourced, that your sales staff is actually trained and they can answer that correctly. So those are things I think that just, you know, from a clarification standpoint, just be very sure on the terminology you're using. I'm sure Sarah can add on that from the legal standpoint.
Sure. It is imperatively important that your sales staff know what they're talking about when you're making claims about the jewelry that you're selling. This is the sort of, you may be familiar with the Federal Trade Commission guidelines for advertising in the jewelry industry. These are guides that really govern how we market our products in the jewelry industry. The Federal Trade Commission also has guides for other claims. They have an entire section called the Green Guides. These regulate claims such as eco-friendly and sustainable and things like that. All of these guides are available for free on the Federal Trade Commission website, which is ftc.gov, and you can read them. But organizations like JVC that I work for, we exist to help you understand those kinds of regulations. So if you were ever reading something about the FTC guides or a guideline about the industry and you did not understand what they were asking you to do, you can call my office and ask to talk to me, and I will talk to you and explain that to you and help you make sure that the claims you're making are legitimate. Yes?
So if a regional chain or small chain jewelry company wants to hire a company to come in and handle the training in a sales training format, where would they go to get that? Who
That's a great
supplies
question.
those services?
So there are organizations that do that. UL is a third-party service organization that can help with that training. Everything from the FTC compliance for precious metals, from label disclosure. There's a whole other sector of compliance when you get into fashion and children's jewelry, but we could talk for hours about that, and it's a little dry. And then also from the responsible sourcing. So UL is a service provider. There's other service providers that are out there. Some of the ways that you can find these service providers, if you go onto, for example, the RJC website and look at their approved auditing firms, if you went onto the LBMA website and went on and looked at their approved auditing firms.
Oh, Doug, yes, please.
It's a very challenging issue. And I think as head of an organization, someone that's very involved in these issues, and someone who's been not on the abstract level, but on a specific level, in mines, working with artisanal miners and things, if you think these are abstract concepts here, talk to someone in Burma that's 400 meters down on the mine. They really want to do the right things, but they don't really know how to do those things. And I think one of the issues, and I'm just trying to urge caution here. OECD guidelines are difficult to consume. They address conflict minerals. Dodd-Frank is impenetrable, and I don't think it's going to be around much longer. But the point is, those are all legislatively or based on agreements, international agreements. I think it's important for us as an industry to start taking tiny steps. We cannot, at least in my opinion, you cannot turn this on and off. You cannot go from non-ethically sourced to ethically sourced. You can't do that. you have to have an area of progress. So I think what we need is ethical sourcing for dummies. Steps to get there. Well, I mean, literally, has anyone in here read the OECD guidelines? Or Dodd-Frank Act? Okay. The point is that we need, the industry needs something that's, I don't think there's too many people in the industry that can say, I am 100% ethically sourced, because we don't even agree what ethically sourced means.
Doug, that's a great point, and I think that there are small steps that you can take to start on this process. And the first step, in my personal opinion, is turning to suppliers and just asking them questions. Just ask. Say, where did this come from? How was it made? How did it get to here? And just start somewhere. And that is a great somewhere to start, by asking those questions and getting that information from your suppliers. And there are a lot of players in the industry now who, if they are not satisfied with those answers, are going to turn around and start asking somebody else, a different supplier, those questions. But I think that the RJC and the OECD and all of these alphabet soup organizations are very intimidating, but we want you to be able to take those small steps to start on the path to responsible sourcing. There's an initiative happening in the jewelry industry right now called the Jewelry Industry Summit. We've had 2 of these so far, one in New York and one in Tucson, in partnership with the AGTA. And these are small working groups that get together, that we've now done twice, where we start from nothing. We start from the very basic level of what does responsible sourcing mean to you and how do we get there. And over the course of 2 days, we have talked about what it means and what kinds of questions you should be asking, and that has sort of broken off into certain initiatives that are going in the jewelry industry now. One of the most important ones, I think, is an initiative to eliminate silicosis with gem cutters, and the AGTA is partnering with the summit, and that has actually moved forward. And there are a number of other initiatives in this area that are moving forward. And you can get involved in that by attending the next summit, but also by going to the summit website, which I think is jewelryindustrysummit.com, and looking at the initiatives that have grown out from .org, and that have grown out from this summit, and you can get involved right now. If you, as a jewelry retailer, you think that is something that's important, you can get in touch with the people who have these initiatives and get involved now, even if you haven't come to the summit. Yes, Nancy.
I think we have 10 more minutes before everybody has to move to their first set of meetings. So can we please talk about Made in the USA?
Yeah, before we do, can I just make one, I'd like to just say one thing. First of all, I think the point that Doug made is incredibly important, and one of the things that we all want you to know is that every step is meaningful. The idea of this panel is not to present some set of draconian regulations and impenetrable pages and say, this is what you must do. The idea is for us to introduce some of these words, these concepts. We hope we'll have the honor and privilege of doing this many more times, and to explain them, to help in any way, whether you are at stage 1 or whether you've already been certified by the RJC and you have another